Peter, I was told one time by a gentleman by the name Howard French, who you might in fact be familiar with because he used to be a key journalist for the New York Times, covering Africa from Abidjan. And he covered the Congo very, very closely. And he talks about one time when Bill Clinton, who was then president, personally wrote a letter to Mobutu Sese Seko, in a sense, to really step down. This was before Mobutu was, of course, attacked by the neighboring countries back in 97?
Yes.
Yeah. What about that? That, in fact, Clinton's ambassador to the United Nations at the time personally took that letter and handed it to Mobutu Sese Seko, who read it and said, wait a minute, I have been with you all this time. I have been delivering. What is wrong with you? I'm going nowhere.
Yes, and today the current Bill Clinton's successor in the Oval Office, President Barack Obama, last year personally called Joseph Kabila to urge him to follow the good example of Goodluck Jonathan, who, despite wanting to stay on, accepted the democratic verdict and had the historic transition in Nigeria to do the same. It's a message that has been repeated by the Vice President, the Secretary of State, and other officials down the line. The U.S. position has been very clear. The Congolese constitution needs to be respected, and Joseph Kabila can best assure his place in history by respecting it. Unfortunately, I think it's been an exercise in futility because all indications are that that appeal, however reasonable, has fallen on deaf ears.
When these people meet, really, what do they talk about? For example, the Secretary of State, John Kelly, reportedly met with President Kabila in New York recently. What do they actually talk about?
I think part of it is urging someone like him to, there is a future. I think one of the problems was the original sin, if you will, in this was back in 2001, when his father, Laurent Désiré Kabila, was assassinated by his own bodyguard. And then Joseph was 29, did not even speak Lingala, the lingua franca of the western part of the country, stepped into the office without even the color of law, and the international community acquiesced to it. And since then, he's been there, and he's a young man. He's still in his early 40s. He has a long life ahead of him. We've established a principle of impunity, and now what's he going to do? There have been reports, and the Panama Papers have augmented, that he and his family have enriched themselves. Are they going to be able to keep their wealth? Is he going to have to look over his shoulder for the rest of his days, fearing prosecution either for human rights abuses, war crimes from the Civil War, or the ill-gotten gains of the last few years? So that's not a very attractive future for him. So one has to try to persuade someone like him that there is a future that doesn't necessarily entail a one-way plane ticket to The Hague.
What about the Panama Papers? Is there anything more that you can tell us about that, in fact, as it concerns Joseph Kabila? Because I saw the twin sister's name, Jeanette Kabila, being displayed very prominently. Do you have any details on that?
Well, only the details. I can relay the details that the international consortium of journalists who have this trove of documents, have been publishing their analyses, have put out there. And it appears that not only is Sister Jeanette displayed there, but she seems to have had hidden interests in some of the more lucrative concessions and licenses, including in the telecom sector in the country. One of the president's closest business associates, Israeli billionaire Dan Gertler, is mentioned some 200 times in the documents that have been publicized so far, including, interestingly, in a report just released by Global Witness, the NGO, looking at these documents, that apparently some of the concessions for petroleum in the Democratic Republic of Congo were given to firms that were created through the mechanisms of the shell companies run through Panama, and that somewhere in the note, and again, this is the analysis that's been published by those who have access to the papers, something like $1.3 billion worth of revenue that belongs to the Congolese state have evaporated into these shell companies. So there's quite a lot, and I'm sure there's more to come.
Very interesting, because long ago, during the Carter administration, there was a story about Mobutu Sese Seko coming to Washington and asking for aid. When he was asked to perhaps to borrow his government, the government of Congo, because he was reputed to be one of the 5 richest men in the world. He responded by saying that, you know, I don't trust the Congolese government because it may not be able to pay back. Very interesting.